in the door again with Trivecta.
You just got off tour with 7 Lions and Tritonal and Kill the Noise, is that correct?
That's correct.
How was that?
It was really cool. I'm still glowing about it. Really, really neat to be able to spend that time with those people and play for those crowds and sort of see how they do it and learn everything about it. Was really, really cool.
We have you here doing a remix for 7 Lions. So did this come into the works before you went on tour with him?
No, I actually sent him a message before his EP came out. It was like 2 weeks ahead of time. And I said, hey, I know you got an EP coming out. If you're trying to get a remix done for it, you send a little something my way. So he sent me the EP. So obviously keep it to yourself and float through and see if there's anything that you want to remix. And a couple of them stood out, but this one kind of felt like the right move. And that was maybe a couple months before the tour.
When you've got so many layers and so much going on in one project, how do you find sounds that work together? Do you tend to prefer to find sounds that work together naturally, or do you have to do quite a lot of mixing and stuff to get it all fitting?
It generally involves a lot of mixing and stuff like you said, but what you said about finding sounds that go together naturally is really important, because if you can find those, then it means less mixing that you have to do. And sometimes you have to do little things where you have to tweak these sounds to make them sound really weird so they'll fit in there. But if it makes it kind of fill out nicely, that's cool. But other times you find yourself tweaking these sounds to make them fit and you go, I just did all this tweaking and this sound really doesn't even complement what I have that well anymore. So then you kind of got to step back and change it. But one thing I've really tried to do lately, and this song I've been getting better with it, was making sure that you know what the main kind of sound is and building around that. And so if your main sound is really nice, for example, in the drop, if your main kind of lead sound is good, then make sure that you're kind of doing little layers and things to accentuate that, rather than just, okay, this sounds good, now that sounds good, but now this part doesn't sound good, so I'm going to change this part out, now I'm going to change that to fit that. And then you end up with this vicious cycle where you keep changing things to accentuate other things. You got to remember where your anchor was.
If someone's watching this who hasn't seen the first episode that we did with Trivecta, I highly encourage you to watch that as a preface to this, because a lot of questions, a lot of things I'm going to be talking about, it's a part 2 of that. With creating layers, how do you go about it melodically? I know we talked about it in the last episode. There's just something about it that just kind of like was mind-boggling to me, of how you could have so many layers, but then keep track in your mind, like the melodic parts of each layer.
It's a nightmare. It sucks. Taking breaks helps a lot with not letting your mind get overdriven, but also what really helps is consolidating your layers and balancing them to audio. You can see some of these big tracks like that are like, it says "Without You My Love" chords remaining. This is like "Without You My Love" remaining sounds. Like these are these long tracks that you can tell I cut up. Bounces, pads, B drop and stuff. And the reason is because I started the project in a completely different project file and then got the main idea all sort of there. Got 200 layers and I'm driving myself crazy. And what you're talking about is starting to set in, where even if you take breaks, your brain is like, I can't do this. Sifting through all that. You want to change one sound, but you have to mute like 10 tracks of layers to like get the idea, and it's so bulky and it slows you down. So what I do is I take that and like, what can I live if it's all stuck together? I'm going to print all my pads together. I'm going to print all my leads together. I'm going to print all my mid basses together. And then I bounce that out to maybe 30 tracks and then start a whole new project file with those 30. And now I have those to work on. And so that's what these big ones are. Like these guys are that. Like you can tell they look kind of neat and they look like audio. But then there's other parts that are not like that. You can see little bits of things I start layering in. Like I redid my sub and he's still MIDI. Little things like that. But grouping it early and exporting to a new project helps with that a lot.
There's multiple ways to take a bunch of tracks and convert it into one piece of audio. What's your preferred way of doing it?
It depends. A lot of times what I'll do, if I'm just working on a song, what works best for my workflow, like if I'm in the middle of working on the song, is I'll just create a bus, route a few tracks out to this bus. Then I'll just record that bus right there.
Is that using resample mode, or do you record it in the more normal way?
Say I have like this guy right here. I know this is audio. I'll usually do it if it's MIDI. Say I want to layer a couple audio things together. I'll take this guy, and I got this guy, and I got this guy. And they're actually already rooted to a bus. I already stuck them in new builds bus. I'll literally just go like boom, boom. And you can see it's just recording there, et cetera, et cetera. I'll take as much as I need. I'll just create a new audio track, drop it right there. And then I have all of them grouped together. So I'll do stuff like that usually. I don't know if that's resample mode or just normal audio.
That's just the normal audio mode, which I suppose works for your workflow because you're bussing things out. But if you didn't have stuff grouped or bussed, then resample mode would take 1 or 2 less clicks. But it's the same sort of idea.
There's the drop, and then there's a little bit of a letdown, and then there's the second part of the drop. B drop. In there, you have the vocal rising. You show us how you did that because that was really, really cool.
So that was probably from the previous project.
Yep.
So a lot of times when working on a song, once I have the vocal, I'll go like, okay, where's the little nuggets of glory? Yeah, you find these little something he or she sings. That's really nice right there. And I'll take that little syllable, I'll kind of hang on to it. So what I would have done was probably taken O-I. There you go. So you get an I right there. Right? And that sounds so nice. Using that as an instrument is so much more interesting than using just a synth or something. What I'll do with something like that is I'll just take the vocal right there and then kind of chop it. I would spend more time on it, but I'll do it quick to give the idea. Consolidate that. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll put it in a sampler. You'll take this guy and then you can be like, all right, boom. By the way, Adam, thanks to your trick, you notice I'm hiding my things up on the side there. You taught me how to do that now. I'll go to like instruments. I'll pull this guy in there. And then you have to set it to what its pitch is, right? So it's like G. Okay, so you set this guy to like G. And now the tough part is you hear there's the harmony is in there too. So it doesn't work on like, it's okay there. You can kind of get away. There you hear a weird, that guy's not in key, that little harmony on top. So what I had to do there was take that on that exact note, EQ, look up online a frequency chart of where that note was, and then find that and EQ dip all those notes. You can still kind of hear it, but it's quiet enough that it doesn't get in the way. So you can hear it like, you can kind of hear it there, but it's quiet enough that it gets masked and you don't notice it. And then I just ran it through a bit crusher and bounced it all out. And that was how that kind of thing came to be.
Is there an easier way to do that? I get the idea that, you put it in the sampler and now you're playing with it, but you're right, because the harmonies in there, they're out of key. Is there a different way to go and like kind of mask the certain notes that aren't in the key? To like go in and find the frequency chart and notch those out? That sounds like a lot of work.
I think there is an EQ plugin, I can never remember the name, that actually does a whole bunch of peaks based on frequency. So that might be the simpler way to do it. Actually, there are EQs out there where you can just type in the note and then it finds the cutoff for you automatically, but it's not super quick.
Honestly, didn't take that long and I was kind of stoked because I thought it was like a really cool idea.
Has anyone ever tried multi-band auto-tune? Like, is that a real thing? Like creating an instrument rack, high, mid, low, throw an auto-tune on all of them and have it change on certain things?
Oh my gosh.
The higher harmonies are what causing you problems. So what if you went in, you found the frequency, you just threw an auto-tune out there, have that tuned down?
I could be wrong because I didn't use it for this, but I use Wavestune, but I know a lot of people use Melodyne. And I think in Melodyne, there's a way it'll detect what your chord is.
Oh yeah, you can do that. I forgot about that.
But this vocal already had reverb on it. It was already wet and everything. And I guess that the Melodyne stuff would help with that. And if I remember correctly, I think what I did was I knew that melody needed to be fattened out. So like, yeah, that was like a serum sound. You can hear it ducking on the side chain, but with the snare, it sounds... Without that, it loses a lot of the body. It really needs that to kind of work together. And that comes back to what you were saying before about the layering thing. If you just have two sounds or so that work together really nicely, the other guys can kind of just fill in little spaces.
The downbeat of the first drop, it's some kind of like cool sound designy, bassy, weird sound.
That thing,
yeah, what is that?
The effects, you can tell what I did. This was all from the original project file here. Just effects bust together. But what that would have been is I'll go a lot of times on like Splice and look up like psytrance effects or like little like genres that have little glitchy effects and stuff like that. Like psytrance and glitch hop are known for that. And I'll just download them and I'll just float through on a morning and just be like, all right, that sounds cool. Little and stick them in a folder. And then when I'm working on songs, I'll have them right there. I think that was just one of those little glitches that I would have picked up from Splice or something. The key is finding the right one for the right time, obviously. But it just kind of felt like it gave you a nice little bit of little something there, yeah.
Curious about your pre-master duts and chain bus.
The pre-master thing was something I read from PEGBOARD nerds a while ago. They were saying that if you have a separate pre-master bus, which is what your whole track goes into, all of your groups, then if you put things on your master, say I want to pull in a reference track and I'll throw it up top or something, and I want to monitor my low end versus the reference track, I can put stuff on my master, so my track, and have it not affect the actual reference track that I'm referencing back and forth at the same time. So it's listening to the one track, okay, man, that sub sounds nice. How's my track sound? And I turn this on. And say I want to be like, oh man, but my peaks are bumping through and I'm not getting a good reference. Let me put a limiter just a little bit on my track and then compare them, see how that would sound. Oh, but I don't want my limiter to affect the reference track I'm listening to. So that's where I put the limiter on the pre-master bus and have my whole track going out to that. So I can have a nice clean master and route other things out there. Although I don't think, I don't even have anything on. The pre-master allowed me to take a little, in this case, have a utility. A producer named Darian taught me this one. Bump up your volume, just like a dB or something on your drop. So you can tell here I just automated down and to come up. So there's another use of that right there. I don't always do that, but this track I did.
What is your approach to doing effects like reverb or delays and stuff like that? Because I feel like with the crap ton of layers that you have, it could get really messy really, really fast.
You have to be really careful. A lot of sounds that you would think need reverb don't. They just might need to get pushed back with a little bit of cutting out some of the highs or something. It's really easy for that to get really busy really fast. Like, if you notice, a lot of these sounds, I'll put reverb sometimes on my quieter layers and things like that. You can tell that's pretty dry. Also, you can tell right there, the audio cuts. Obviously, I'd cut audio in the previous track and then just bounce it all out like that. But having everything bounce out to audio helps a ton with reverb because you can make your track sound really big. And sometimes you want them to sound real wet. It's going to get everywhere. I'll do crazy stuff with reverb. Sometimes I'll even take reverb and I'll throw like some distortion after the reverb and then throw a little more reverb after that to make sure it's not just two in your face. And you'll get this crazy thing where the distortion is pushing this weird convoluted tail out. But then you have to make that audio. Otherwise, it's the end. Like that's one of my leads that I'll use a lot. That sound I've been tweaking for years. But he's, you can tell he just cuts. He's got to stop right there. So that's why there always got to be audio if you're putting a lot of reverb on it.
So that sound that you just showed us sounds extremely similar to the type of sound that you had in the Illenium remix. I'm assuming it's similar.
This is like my main go-to. I've been tweaking this lead for a long time, but it's under my instrument. I think I saved it as emotive lead, and I have multiple versions: emotive 2, emotive 3, emotive clean, emotive fast. I think this is the one I probably would have been using there. I've been tweaking it for a while to try to get to kind of open up. And it doesn't reset, so it does a nice little bit. And I'll sometimes put distortion after that whole entire thing, and that Wolf compressor helps to clean it up a little bit. But I'll usually, as you can tell, that thing just goes for days. So that thing always gets chopped. It's rarely MIDI in my songs. I'll make it and then I'll just bounce it out and mute it in case I want to redo it and fix it.
What's that Wolf compressor? I've actually never seen that before.
Sick, man. So there's a band called Wolfpack, and if anybody's listening to this, go check out Wolfpack. This Wolf compressor is one of their plugins they made with Goodhertz, I think is the name of the company. And it's really neat. Their sound in general, Wolfpack is known for being sonically, it sounds vintage and almost like it was recorded on a vinyl or something. And this kind of helps to create that sort of more mellowed out effect, and it can smooth down the edges of things. If I turn it off here you are. Extreme example here. Let's go all the way on the Wolf. You can hear it almost sounds like it's trimming the highs, but it's not. It's kind of just warming up the whole sound. It does this weird little wow thing. I think that's supposed to make a vinyl thing right there.
Did you have LFO tool on after a normal sidechain compressor on one of the previous things?
Something about the LFO tool is like you'll set it to duck right in the beginning, like the default setting, right? Kind of, comes up from the bottom. But I'll notice it's never dead on the track. It's kind of like I'll have to shift the entire phase of the whole thing just slightly to make it feel like it's working exactly. Otherwise, it's like, I feel like it's always just slightly off. And I'll overthink it. So I'll do my LFO tool thing, but then I'll take a compressor, a sidechain compressor with just a really short top end of a kick. And it's just to make sure that if it's not lining up perfectly on the LFO tool, that I have a sidechain that is is actually listening to the kick and making sure it pulls down right when the kick hits.
That's always been my biggest fear about using something like LFO Tool as my main sidechain compression, because I don't use LFO Tool. It could be latency in the plugin, but I would expect more people to have mentioned it if it was a major problem.
I've heard people have their gripes with sidechaining with it, but I haven't read in too much to why. But I love how you can design the sort of pulses with the sidechain. So when I do sidechain with LFO Tool, I always make sure I have that, an actual quick, real, like dedicated compressor sidechain to make sure it is doing it. And I'll use the LFO Tool to do something more stylistic if I wanted to kind of crest a little bit more.
Is there a look ahead setting on the LFO Tool?
There probably is. Maybe that would fix my problems, huh?
Potentially. I mean that is what the look ahead does.
I believe you touched on this in the Illenium remix, but how do you approach doing a remix? You know, when you got these stems over here, what does your process look like? What are the first steps that you do to kind of get you in the right headspace?
This is actually a great project for me to answer that, because a lot of times as a producer, you'll find yourself poking around with ideas and stuff like that, trying to make something work. But for this one, my reason for picking this track was because I had a vision. Anytime as a producer that you have a vision for a track, it's like Christmas, or for me, Hanukkah. I know what I want to do with this. And for this one, it was his original tune had this vocal. Obviously, you've heard it here. It builds, and the buildup is really nice. And my build is similar to his build. It's a little faster, but my actual first part of the song with the vocal up until around the buildup is fairly similar to what he does. And he had sent me mostly stems for that part too. So most of the stems he sent me were the vocal and little things that went under the vocal in the first part of the tune. And around where the drop happens, that's kind of where the stems ended. And that went perfectly with my vision, because what I was thinking was like, all right, this tune, it had this cool kind of like, if I remember correctly, the drop. It was very mellow and open space, and there wasn't much chord movement in the drop. There wasn't the big sort of wall of sound that a lot of Seven Lions music is known for, which was cool. I like that he kind of went this way, and he's been doing things like that, and I thought that was pretty neat. But this song, the vocal definitely had, when I first heard it, I was like, oh man, it would have sounded really cool if he had taken that vocal 2 years ago when he was doing a lot more stuff that had a lot more sort of chord resolution on that drop, and he had run with it that way. I was like, I wonder what that would have sounded like. So then I was like, wait, okay, a lot of my tunes, like that Fractures remix, and I'd like to do that sort of big sort of thing. It comes from trance music. I feel like this song, it needs that, and so why don't I just try to make something that gives you that resolve kind of wanted when I listened to the original. That was kind of where that came from. The idea was like, all right, let's make a drop that really kind of takes everything from the vocal that I really wanted as a payoff and make it happen. That was the approach with this. And then when it came to the B drop, that was like, all right, that one that you were asking, I was just kind of playing around with different stuff and trying to make something that came after that. And then honestly, I probably would have done something different for the last drop, but I was up against a deadline. It was a short deadline, and there were things in the song that I would have maybe changed, but the deadline was kind of nice because I got to finish the song and not have to worry about it.
How long did this track specifically take?
It was shorter than a lot of other ones because there was a deadline. I want to say I had it wrapped within a month and a half or so, which usually I like to take longer than that, sometimes just to sit on the idea and listen with fresh ears. But I put a lot of time during those days, especially coming up towards the end when I knew there was a deadline. And then when I sent it to Jeff and he gave me some feedback too, that helped. But from there, I was like, working until my hands kind of fell off. And so there's a lot of time, but also breaks within that time, probably about a month and a half total.
Do you think you factored in Seven Lions at all when making it in terms of what you thought they might like, or was it purely your own judgment?
There was always that looming thing. When I started doing electronic music, I was real into like Skrillex and stuff like that. And then when I heard a lot of the Seven Lions stuff, like a lot of producers I know come from a similar place, he kind of busted open a lot of doors for a lot of people. And so he's obviously been a major influence for me, because a lot of times in the past, I wouldn't have remixed any of his tunes until, but now it's kind of feeling ready for it. And there's obviously that kind of, all right, yeah, definitely want to make sure I do something that he's going to like. When he told me that he loved it, that was really cool. That was really exciting, but it pushed me a lot because he's such a good producer. And I was like, all right, a lot of producers have gone through a phase, a lot of melodic bass producers, most melodic bass producers have gone through a phase where they tried to emulate something that Seven Lions did. Like there's like, he's done a lot of, but the interesting thing, if you talk to him, is what he does is he's thinking creatively, putting things together, thinking what would be cool if I took this and combined this with that. And, and that's how a lot of the real creative producers or artists in any genre think. They're thinking creatively, not, okay, how am I going to sound like this guy? It's like, okay, what can I do that's creative and different? What if I took this and blended it with that? I think it was Bowie said, mix something really cool with something not cool and put it together and see what you can get. And so with this, I was trying to channel that. I was like, okay, all right. Like I'm remixing the guy. The guy is really good at thinking outside the box and doing something creative here. So I'm going to try to do something also that is like creative and outside the box. And that's where like doing a little vocal synth and things like that. And it kind of helps liberate the creative process a little bit and allow me to be like, all right, this is kind of unnatural, this idea. And this idea might be a little unconventional, but in my heart, I feel like it's really cool. So I stuck with it.
So what was a lot of the feedback that came from Seven Lions from Jeff? Was he just like, wow, this is great, and that's it? Or did he give you ideas?
He said that he really liked it. And I think he said I forget what the wording was, but he said something really sick about the B drop that you asked about. But he gave me some specific feedback, which was stuff I hadn't thought about much. Like the top of my snare needed a little bit more coming out, a little more brightness on the top of my snare in the first drop. One that was really neat, and now I've heard him do it going on tour. I caught it, some of the stuff in his set. He was saying that in pre-drop, I should make the melody stand out a little more to hint at the melody. So this right here. So you have this main drop. And he was saying here, and that was great feedback. He said, make this stand out to that melody so you can hear it now. And now you get like, it makes you really want that melody. And that was really clever on his part because I had it in there, but it was really quiet and you weren't really noticing it. And he was like, no, pull that thing out.
It'll let you know what's coming, but just giving you a little bit of a taste.
Exactly. That's the idea. It goes a long way.
Since the last time that we met, has there been any game-changing techniques that you've learned?
I'm always trying to improve my sub bass game. We talked about this last time. One neat trick I've learned is having a little bit of in silence, playing with the phase, the saw wave. So if you have your sub right there and you pull in just a little bit of saw and sometimes change the phase for certain notes, it can come out a little better on some different systems. That was one that's been really cool lately. And I don't know why using silent for my sub bass has been kind of neat lately. I've been doing that a little bit. I think I did operator for this one actually, but that was one that I've been doing a lot of lately has been like reversing. I've always reversed sounds, but lately reversing like crazy sounds, like mega horns or like big impacts or things like that into like a really soft part. Taking like big trailer hits and just reversing it into a soft vocal can have this really kind of cinematic effect, especially if you have like a really soft breakdown and you have like white noise going into a vocal and then you want to suck it out and you layer just at the very end, just a big trailer hit. Obviously you pull out the very lows and you just reverse it straight in the vocal and just hard cut right when the vocal starts and you have like a little soft piano and a vocal. It can sound super kind of like, woof, it can really put you in the moment right there.
Really quick, I have to give a movie example of what you're talking about right now. The episode that we released this last week was with AU5. We had a little bit of a rant about the new Star Wars. Did you like it, Sam?
I'm an obsessive Star Wars fan.
You do gotta admit, there's one part that incorporates exactly what you're talking about. So for those who don't know, this was like emotionally, like I was almost in tears about how amazing this was. There was just something about this that was just like incredible. In Star Wars, you know, ships can go into light speed. So this one ship was gonna fly into this other ship at light speed. There was all this tension, all this noise, like all that, I don't know, like razor blade on piano strings kind of stuff. Like it was building. And then when it hit the other ship, it was like dead silence. I actually do think there was like a little bit of like maybe like sub or mid range in there, right? That was just like kind of lingering. There's just something about that like when something so serious happens or like when something so intense happens and everything just goes silent, it's just like so epic. It's just like, whoa. I see what you're saying with this, man. You got this big old impactful thing and it's reversing. It's like, and then it's just like a gentle vocal.
And you got to do it at the right time because if you do it at the wrong time, it can just be a letdown.
What's the most common mistakes you see people send you tracks?
There's a bunch. I know them from making them myself. One is not policing your highs. Everybody talks about policing your low ends, making sure you know that it's just your kick and your sub in your low unless it's for, you know, maybe a breakdown, or if neither your kick nor your sub is hitting at that time, you can put something else. I don't see as much chatter about your top end in that respect. And this song was tough, obviously, in the drop because of how much you hear going on there to make sure that the highs were working okay. And I'll hear some songs come where there's just so much happening up top, low passing things, to cut out the highs can make your track sound kind of like when you're working on it and you cut out the highs, you might be like, ooh, it sounds like it just lost a lot of energy right there. That's because you're just hearing it with the highs intact. The other thing that I see a lot of people not do is boil it down to its essence. Cut out the parts of the song that don't need to be there. You'll do these construction zone parts and you'll get attached to them and keep working it, and you'll have the track and it goes longer, and then you have this, then it goes that. And, you know, I remember sending a song to John at Monster Cat a while ago. And he was like, "You lost me right here." And I remember being like, "It didn't lose yet. Yeah, this part was awesome." And then being like, looking back, I probably lost him there. And you got to boil the song down to its essence. Cut out the parts that don't need to be there.
If you woke up tomorrow and everyone forgot about this remix and you want to release it again, what would be the things that you would want to change before releasing it again?
I would improve the build into the second drop. I like the melody, but it's... I made this build right before I sent it in, so I never got to like listen with fresh ears. The idea with the silence there was a cool idea, but I didn't execute it as nicely as I could have. It could have been a cleaner energy transition from here. To me, it almost just kind of feels like you're rising, and then you have like a standard just sub drop, and then you just have OI, and then drop. I could have done something a little more interesting there. I would have done this right here differently. That's the same as what happens the first time, and that's a really cool spot to do something different the second time. And I would have done something a little more different in the B drops the second time. Ultimately, a lot of it comes down to doing things differently in the second half of the song instead of being so copy-paste. Also in this part here, I would have worked on my stereo spread. It gets a little narrow and could kind of fill out your sides and feel a little more immersive there. Like, this is nice. And it sounds nice, but it could have spread out. Those are technical things, really. Besides that, I think those are the most things. Probably beef up snare during the builds. Also, I did a little thing with battery, and it kind of came out sounding kind of papery. I'll put a little more transient layer in the snares and the builds. But not much as far as the actual song itself. It's more technical stuff. I'm pretty proud of how the actual song itself came out.
Would you like our feedback?
Yeah, please. Are you kidding? That's the only reason I do this, by the way. I got a free peek into you guys' minds for a second.
Do you know those return tracks? Do you ever use them?
I tried for about a week, maybe 3 years ago, and I've never used them since.
So two options then. So if you simply wanted to hide them away, you can hit the little R towards the bottom right corner down there.
R towards the bottom. Oh!
That will hide away the return tracks. I personally do, because I don't use the defaults myself ever. If you load up a new set, delete the return tracks, and then save that set as your default, then they'll just never appear again.
Get them out of here. I'm doing it.
So I would agree when you were talking about in the build up and right before the drop, you're building. The main reason for the build is, it's self-explanatory. It's to build. It's to build tension. It's to get you like, I need to get into this mind state that's like, I need some type of release when the drop happens. Our jobs as producers is to make it as intense as possible, so that when the drop comes, it's just like, because like the bigger the more people will like the song, you know what I mean? It's just more of a payoff for them. So I agree what you did, the quarter note or the half note before the drop where you had the little sub drop. I feel like it would have been much more impactful if there was no sub at all, because like we're talking about the silence thing, right? If it's just building and maybe like really high end reverb ring out and then just like come right back into the drop.
All right, we're cutting it out. Let's see what it sounds like. Ooh, get out of here. But you were saying a high thing on top, maybe too. Oh. All right, I'm gonna rebounce this out.
Okay. There's just something about that. It's just like everything just stops for a second.
Oh yeah, I would probably put one of those. We were talking about the little glitch things. I would probably put one of those too, just like to make it feel like everything just cut. Or what I was saying earlier about the reverse sort of cinematic. You guys got to do an in the DAW for works in progress is what you got to do.
That's such a good idea. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with adding to the tension of the build, because the build is just, it's such an important part of the song. Have you ever messed around with the mono stereo capabilities of the build? For those who don't know what we're talking about, everything's building, it's growing in tension and everything, but while simultaneously everything's getting more and more mono, it's coming in, it's like, no, it's just compacting into this little stereo space as well, and when the drop hits, just everything's wide again. Again, it adds to the tension. In the build, in my personal opinion, I don't know if things need to be that wide. At least like right before the drop happens. Obviously at the beginning of the build, if you want things to be wide, you do need things to be wide, because then it creates that contrast.
It makes perfect sense. I'm right there with you. I've played with that a little bit. I know some guys, I think Flux Pavilion said that he spends more time on the builds than the drops. And I noticed that on tour. I'm going through this phase working on music now. I'm like, all right, crap. I'm now doing more live shows. It's like, all right. And I'm noticing that in the modern sort of EDM sphere that there is And it is so build, drop, build, drop. One could argue that the build-ups are as important, if not more important, than the drops as far as the shows. Like, it almost feels like the people just get really hyped during the build. You just like, the build-up is where everybody gets super hyped up, and then they're just like chilling for the first, a couple bars of the drop, and then they're back down. It's like, all right, they want another build. It's almost sometimes more than the drop. Tricked into believing we want the drop, but I feel like the build is where a lot of the magic happens.
The little sound designy things that you had throughout there, like the little glitchy things, those things intrigued me so much, because this is my, I shouldn't say love-hate, it's like love-concerned relationship for melodic bass music. A lot of the sound design most of the time is very similar. You have your big old super saw. That makes sense. That's the whole concept. The super saw is here to stay. But I have found, in the melodic bass tracks that I've listened to, the more innovation that I've heard is just like, it just enhances the super saw more. It just like, it makes it better for me to listen to it. Having those little sounds in there, even if it's just like on the turnaround right before drop B comes in again. The best person that I can reference is Seven Lions. If you listen to his songs, he has the super saw, but there is those little sound designy things in there that are just so cool that like, it's like little Easter eggs, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, no, that was nice. I would like to see that more from you. Those little sound designy tricks.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Songs I've been working on lately, when I start putting saws in it, so like, it's not as much I'm getting about the saws, but getting about the same kind of thing that you hear. Mm-hmm. And it needs something like that, like those little things to keep it interesting. What I'm picking up from you right now is you're saying more of the kind of little details that you find so interesting and intriguing. Those little things, like not as much just the big saws, but more little like those little kind of unique little cuts and blips and sounds and things like that are more unique.
Exactly. I need something when I listen to melodic bass music. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling emotional. This is amazing because that's what it is. That's what it's designed for. This is awesome. This is awesome. And then just like this little ear candy that comes in, it's like, that was so cool. That just made it that much better.
The ear candy thing goes a really long way in any genre that starts to feel stale. And melodic bass music definitely is feeling kind of like it's had its thing, and I'm kind of wondering where it's going next, like what it's doing and how sort of tied all of us melodic bass artists are to that. It just makes me wonder in the next batch of tracks I'm working on right now, because there's so many ways you can take any song. Playing live, it's and watching like Jake, like Kill the Noise, he's really good at those things you're talking about right there. In his tracks, there'll be these really creative things where like something will just turn into something totally different. And you're like, man, that was so clever. I don't know, where do you think all this stuff is going? Not even just melodic bass. Where do you think electronic music is going right now?
I think it's going to go more high energy again. In terms of the whole industry, the whole scene, typically it goes high energy, low energy, like fast BPM, slow BPM. So it kind of feels like it's going to ramp back up to faster BPMs and higher energy again.
I agree with the faster BPM, especially in what you're seeing in psytrance coming back out into a lot of the mainstream artist sets. But that works weird live. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But what do you think? Because all the future-based stuff started to happen right away. I was like, this has an expiration date. Some of the dope ones are dope, but a lot of the other ones you're kind of like, all right, this just kind of lurches. I feel like they're still raging so much. I want to see them dance a little more. You go to a funk show and people are like, it never hits that peak. I mean, it hits a peak, not like a peak that you get in these EDM shows. And like you go to a funk show and people are dancing the entire time because it ebbs and it flows. And like EDM, it's like you bob, and not all EDM obviously, but in a lot of the stuff right now, it's like you bob, and then when the big drop happens, you rage, and then drop stops, and then you're like back to like bobbing.
I don't think that is more of a genre and culture thing, because if you go to like a techno or a house night, for example, I mean, people spend 6, 7 hours, 8 hours dancing in a row.
Well said.
I think that might be a EDM specific thing, but yeah, it is a different energy. But then again, I suppose the less obvious thing is, will people who are into EDM transition into a different style of dancing? Because if it's all up and down, high energy stop, is there a transition into a more gradual thing for 4 or 5 hours? I'm not sure.
Right. Will they feel it as just an energy drop off of the music they're listening to, or will they start to adapt and start to be like, oh my gosh, my parents danced, I can dance too? It's
a different almost wavelength, the way I like to look at it, because if you go to like a dubstep show, it's like a minute of high energy, a minute of low energy, a minute of high energy, a minute of low. But if you go to a house and techno night, it can be 20-minute or 30-minute build almost, and then it will fade away. So it's just a whole different different cycle of energy.
I have tracks I want to make that I want to put in my sets. There are tracks that I have that I want to play in my sets. For example, EDX and Chris Reese, the guy producing that music, is so much fun to dance to. It's like this house stuff's like 122 BPM. Oh man, I just start moving. But I think about putting it in one of my sets. I just wonder, I got to experiment with a little bit. I just wonder how well it'll go because, like you said, a different wave.
Something that came to my mind when we were talking about this, maybe this relates, maybe it doesn't, but it was just something that I felt like I should get out, and you guys can work with it as you want, because this kind of brings up the concept of following trends, right? Should we follow a trend? Should we look what's going on around us? Should we utilize that? Should we just ignore it? Should we just do what we want? So on and so forth. Why not do both? And we kind of talked about this in the Behind the DAW episode that you and I had, Sam. I think is actually a really good method to basically not only have your artistic expression where you can just let it out, but to also leverage what's going on in the market right now to be able to have the most. And so what I think we should be doing is you should look at the top songs in a specific genre or the world or wherever, look at them, listen to them, literally write down what you love about each one of those tracks, and then incorporate that into your music. So you're not selling out, but you're taking the techniques that people like and incorporating it. So you're not being, you're not compromising yourself. You're just looking at what's going on. You're like, you know what? I hate that kind of music, but I love that kind of sound design, and everyone is freaking out about it. So there we go.
I would argue that's the best way to do it. It's like walking through a country and saying, hey, I'm not a big fan of this country, but I like what they're doing here, and I'm going to pick up that. What you can also do with what you're saying is you can also say, okay, I don't like this trend. Let me respond to it. It can even be a visceral response, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of everybody 4 on the floor. So I'm going to make something that's not 4 on the floor just because I'm so annoyed.
As a real live example right now, hey Siri, what is the #1 song in the world right now? Eye to Eye by Travis Scott and someone else. I have no idea. That's the #1 in the right now. There's a reason why it's #1. Okay, people are listening to it. So what you could do is you could listen to the song. Even if you hate the song, find things in the song that you like and then emulate them, throw your own spice onto them, and create something new, because your market is the world. That's just how it is, right? Your market is the world, and the world likes certain things in this song. Obviously, that's why it's famous. And so you can go in and not compromise your artistic vision and be like, your list of hating it can be this long, and your list of liking it can be this long, and that's fine, because you have a list that things that you can incorporate now and basically leverage. You see what I'm saying? Is this making sense?
Dog, I'm a guitar teacher during the day, and I go through phases where I'm listening to all of the popular songs to make sure I'm up with what my students are listening to, and then there are phases where I'm not. Right now I'm out of it just because of the tour that we just got back from, but before that I was way in. And when I'm listening to those tunes and I'm doing what you just said, I have some of my most creative and inspired moments, because I'll be, oh my gosh, this is what's so fresh. So like some of the production, I remember when Sorry came out by Justin Bieber, that's when I was doing exactly what you're saying. I was really hip on what was happening in pop radio, and I remember being really influenced by a lot of the first of all, how there was a couple sounds right in the beginning and you immediately knew what song it was, just based off like 3 sounds that came in. But also right around when that was coming out, you had a lot of these really minimal beats. And I think minimalism is kind of becoming more of a thing lately. And part of going back to Psytrance, tight kind of minimalism thing. And Adam, what you were saying there about going back to high energy, I'm wondering if there's a way to channel some of that minimalism into high energy and make it, because a lot of times minimalism can get sort of associated with there's not as much happening to keep it all going. I'm wondering if there's a cool way to start pushing that, maybe combining with some of the cool trends that are happening right now into a way that leverages, works nicely into your own sound, making things that feel a little bit more minimal. But it's interesting because it's coming from where I'm coming from with like melodic bass, and everybody's so used to these wall of sound drops. I do want to find a way to do something like that, like what we're saying right now. I just wonder how to make the right thing that would also work well live, and so on and so forth.
This is good. This is a good conversation, Sam.
This is great.
Any final words for the viewers?
I've said enough. They don't want to hear any more of me.
Did you have a good time coming back on again?
Bring me on again. We'll see how the feedback is going on some of the things you've been telling me. Let me know if I'm getting any better. If I'm kind of going downhill, you tell me.